Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 12th, 2016. It actually is Wednesday, October 12th, 2016 this time. I usually record these things with these preset episodes a day or two in advance, and I did, in fact, record the bulk of the program ahead of time, but I didn't record an opening. And so here I am, recording this opening. Good morning. How you doing, everybody? I'm busy and away from the computer as you may be listening to this live. Of course, if you're listening via podcast, it never makes a difference, and you needn't concern yourself with it. But today I am actually recording this past midnight on Wednesday, October 12th, 2016. It's a big day, a day we've been waiting for. I've been promoting the hell out of what's coming up today since I knew I was going to be off the air on Wednesday. Today is the day I finally get around to airing the episode I've been threatening for several days, a reading of Swedish Jewfish's We All Knew About the Trafficking, the Untold Story of Trump Model Management, Part 1. Now, this intro will make things a little bit awkward because, of course, the other day when I recorded the actual reading, I just sort of started cold, and so the intro and the reading don't exactly mesh perfectly. I believe I actually start the reading with a recounting of how the other day I saw this article, and I thought I'd sit down and share it with you. So now that gives me a good segue, I guess, into what's coming up next. That's it, though. That's pretty much the bulk of the show, and believe it or not, it takes us with commentary, as always goes along with our reading on the articles. It takes up nearly all 2 hours of the show. One or two background articles that are used as sources by the diarist, Swedish Jewfish, again, is where you'll find her parked on Daily Coast, just to sort of set the tone, because it's a big topic, and like I've said, it's one we've touched on a number of times in the show in the past, but this is what we were looking for. This is the sort of thing that ties it all together and puts a more coherent narrative to it. We've been putting bits and pieces of this speculation together for quite some time. And this is a great accomplishment. It's a tremendously long piece, and I know a lot of people probably didn't get through it. I even had some word from some people who are fans of the show who said that they were looking forward to this episode in particular because they really wanted to read this article, but had, in some cases, some physical difficulty, eyesight problems that make it difficult to sit down and look through an article this long, this detailed, this dense. So this actually overcomes some ability barriers as well, which is probably a first for the show in terms of it being an intentional act. But it reminds me from time to time that maybe we do provide something more of a value-added service than just snarky commentary along with an article by doing things this way. I thought that was sort of a nice touch too. But enough about me. I haven't done anything here today. And the value added is my willingness to sit, read the article, ponder it as we go through, make some commentary along the way, and then, wow, I guess we all just sit and wait with bated breath for part 2 of We All Knew About the Trafficking, the Untold Story of Trump Model Management. But in order to make sense of part 2, of course, you got to get through part 1 first. And why don't we just get right to it, shall we? So the other day, a post that made the recommended list caught my eye over at Daily Coast, and you've likely seen it because it was extraordinarily well read. And it reminded me of a topic that I dance around and tiptoe around fairly often on the show, and I thought I would maybe take this opportunity to read through this one. It's an extraordinarily long and detailed post, which I guess it should be. And I want to read first a setup piece in the Daily Beast that the post, the diary in question, references early on, that I think sets the table for the much longer piece that I'll share with you in a few minutes after I get through this one. In the Daily Beast, the piece here is Donald Trump used model parties, that is fashion model parties, to seal deals, industry sources say. It's an interesting thing. Michael Gross is the writer here. The Daily Beast, again, is the publication. Like I said, I have been up to the line and tiptoeing around the story of, and indulging in conjecture, speculating, if you will. It would be irresponsible not to speculate about the relationship that Donald Trump has to the models in his modeling agency, the women who compete in his various beauty pageants. I've always thought it was a little strange, to say the very least, that the guy who made his fortune allegedly in real estate, he didn't, but he says he did, or making great deals. He's always involved in something. It's always a little small time-ish to think about the way Donald Trump was supposedly the great developer with these enormous projects, and he's in, the Donald Trump steaks and the water and the wine and just all the dumb little dinky things that he's done along the way. He takes income where he can get it. Okay, I understand. Any of those incomes would be terrific for me. I'd love it. Be great. I'd be rich, in my opinion. For him, they're little bits and pieces, but whatever. He lives paycheck to paycheck. We understand this. The beauty pageant thing, though, stood out. I don't think anybody has ever said, what's a terrific way to make enormous amounts of money, like empire-sustaining amounts of money? Beauty pageants. I don't think that that's the case. The ROI on a beauty pageant, dollar-wise, I got to imagine it's enough to keep pageant officials well paid and well maintained, but I don't know about it being a cash cow. But maybe I'm wrong. I just thought it was weird that Donald Trump would decide at some point that he's going to collect these things. He's going to own 3, 4 of them, make deals with 5 and 6 others. It seemed like an odd thing to be doing. And, of course, it seemed like an odd thing to be doing alongside buying a Trump model management agency. I don't know whether he started it or whether it was an agency that he bought. I'm not sure how it got started. But I always was sort of put off by the possibility of there being this sort of weird vertical integration. He goes milling around. As Greg pointed out, one of the most potentially damaging lines from the first debate from Hillary Clinton was that one about Trump liking to hang out at beauty pageants. That was as gentle a way as you could put it. And I've been thinking about that ever since. And I think, my conjecture here is that he's hanging out at the beauty pageants. And I imagine that the conversation sometimes comes around to basically stuff like, boy, you really look great. You're terrific. You're just beautiful. There's a lot of opportunity out there in the world for you if you want to break into modeling. I have a modeling agency. Oh, it's so serious. We have models all over the place. The most beautiful models in the world. You could be one of them if you play your cards right. Smooth and silky he is. So I always thought there was something a little bit disturbing about it. Then I read about the modeling agency itself, and we all read the Mother Jones piece. We talked about it on the air about how, but that focused really on the immigration angle that he used to, or still does, bring young girls, and you might as well just throw the underage word out there. I don't know what they're being used for, but they would be underage if you used them for certain purposes, let's say. But they're very young girls, very young teenage girls. And in the modeling industry, I guess that's not really all that unusual. In the sex trafficking industry, though, I guess, I don't know how unusual it is, but it would be illegal in enough ways to put you in jail. But that's not what they were doing, et cetera, et cetera. But all that aside, there's a couple of articles here that cast some doubt, let's say, on the question of whether or not there really was what they were doing. I'm just thinking about the modeling thing and the beauty pageant thing and the what else? The still pending lawsuit alleging that Trump had in fact sexually assaulted, raped a girl who was then 13 years old, and his connection to what's his name, the really weird billionaire who has been convicted of exactly that kind of activity, Jeffrey Epstein. That was it, and the weird relationship that they have, and no one wants to really explore that, of course, because it's also said that Bill Clinton had some kind of relationship with Epstein, and maybe it's best if we stay away from all that. But as far as I know, nobody's alleging anything like that about Bill Clinton, except, of course, occasional protesters at his public appearances who stand up and scream that he's a rapist, which I don't know. I can't say no to it. And there's certainly been no story credibly put forth that meets the usual definition. Sexual harasser, yeah, I think we all have to admit that. Though serial philanderer, that's another one, and I think that I guess that comes in just under sexual harasser. I mean, Monica Lewinsky was over 21, right, at the time, but president and an intern, sure, the dynamic's not good, to be sure. Jennifer Flowers, whose name, of course, came back into the news the other day when Donald Trump insisted that he might try to invite her to the first debate, was, at least by most accounts, a consensual relationship, although not one of which I would approve. But what am I, Joe Lieberman here? I don't need to moralize about this. It's an unhappy episode, to be sure. But it's not as dark as what I thought might be going on in the weird interplay between Donald Trump, his friends, Epstein, the Stewie Rara types, the other Russian mobster-connected guys who live in the Trump Tower frat house, and all the horrible things that could be going on in between. And I didn't know about this Daily Beast piece. It was published on, July 19th. And I missed it. And the Mother Jones thing came out later. And again, that was about the immigration thing. Well, we bring in foreign girls, and we tell them to lie to customs. We just say they come in on tourist visas, and if they're questioned by immigration officials, they just say, I'm meeting with some agents, but I'm not here to work. But it was all a lie, so that they could, and then they ended up working. But it was illegal for them to be working, but it's not the worst crime in the world. But then it certainly gets a little more sordid when you're talking about 14-year-old girls being used this way. Not to mention the wage slavery going on with keeping them in, not that, certainly not very luxurious accommodations in a townhouse, in a basement, in the East Village, and they got to pay exorbitant rates for to pay rent to keep a bed in a dormitory style room, and they basically work just enough to be able to pay that rent. And I guess that, although the Mother Jones article sort of cleared things up for me in terms of why would you do this? What's the money? Is Trump really making that much money or getting that much benefit bringing in young girls from around the world and, managing their modeling careers? Sure, but only getting them just enough work so that they can pay their admittedly exorbitant rent on that. But so what could he have? 8, 10, 15 even girls stashed in these apartments? And for one thing, none of them were alleging, at least to Mother Jones, that they were being trafficked sexually. But then I don't know if the Mother Jones reporters would be the people they would want to talk to about that if it had happened, but maybe it didn't. There could be another reason why they didn't say anything about that. I don't know. But I do know that it doesn't seem like a very high percentage play for Donald Trump to run a legitimate modeling agency where girls are having their picture taken and whatever, and it's a totally legit photo shoot, and, I don't know, Teen Vogue or regular Vogue for that matter runs the photos, and the agency gets paid, and the agency takes a cut, and then some of the money goes back to the girls, but they get robbed of all of it company store, style, having to pay management fees and room and board and whatnot. But that didn't seem like it was going to be something that was going to make Trump a lot of money. But the Mother Jones piece explained also that Trump would make use of these girls for his empire, for his enterprise. In other words, when there was a launch party for one of his stupid products, Trump vodka, Trump steaks, whatever. It was a launch party because, no reason, Donald Trump likes parties, and so they have a launch party. In New York, you launch a product that doesn't need a party normally. If I'm going to sell steaks, here's what I do. Ta-da, I'm selling steaks. I'm in business. Call me up if you want steaks. New York, you got to have a launch party. So you have a launch party for Trump vodka, and in Trump's mind, a launch party has beautiful, glamorous women dressed in revealing outfits, perhaps, or elegant gowns with plunging necklines. He's such a disgusting weasel. Anyway, so where do you get these women? Well, New York's full of them, true, but how do you get them without either having friends who support you or all the money that you say you have? And the answer is, I guess, you compel the models of Trump Modeling Management to come and work that event. And then they walk around on your arm and they wave their hands alluringly in front of distastefully, I'm sure, horribly displayed with gaudy lighting bottles of Trump vodka, which are covered in gold spray paint or whatever. And anyway, so it looks for all the world like the launch of a product that's backed by someone who actually has millions and billions of dollars to spare, but really doesn't. But it looks like it because he's holding it in his own property, so he doesn't have to pay any rental fees for that. And the models that you would ordinarily hire for any launch party of any product has, that kind of fake BS going on. Well, we'll have models walking around like they love this crap. But that costs a lot of money. But not if you own the models, too. So you own the real estate, you own the models, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So you fake the event. Anyway, turns out there's a little bit more to the darker side of it than I thought. And I'll start now with the Daily Beast piece by Michael Gross. Again, the title, Donald Trump used model parties to seal deals, industry sources say. There's a subtitle for this, and it's meant to be quite a tease, I guess, but I don't know what it has to do with anything. Maybe it's working on me. Let's find out. The subtitle is Marla Maples, that is a good girl, and I had a good marriage with her, but it's just that I get effing bored, Trump told me. One of those little things. Wow, what? How did this turn so dark? The accusation of plagiarism, remember that one, against Melania Knauss Trump, or her anonymous speechwriters, it was allegedly Meredith McIver, remember, has put the former model on the media griddle. Griddle, that's nice. As the author of Model, a book on the model business, and now Focus on fashion photographers, I've fielded several calls today about the third Mrs. Trump's career as an alleged supermodel and disappointed the questioners, I'm afraid, by firmly dismissing it. Knauss was simply one of the endless parade of pretty but fungible, I always love the word fungible, women who passed through the modeling business hardly making a mark, or rather making hardly a mark, he says, until she turned up at the end of a long line of actress, model, whatevers who've served as arm candy for Donald J. Trump over his 40 years in the public eye. Dating and then marrying Trump transformed Melania into a supermodel of sorts if you consider her professional peak, a near-nude appearance on the cover of British GQ, a mark of distinction. Far more interesting and relevant to the current political debate where Bill Clinton's decades-old sexual improprieties are now being regurgitated by his wife's enemies is Trump's history as what's commonly referred to as a, well, I'll be gentler as I am on the radio, model effer. You know what we're talking about. A model screwer. Okay. That's his history. Before his first marriage, Trump told me in an interview for my book, My Generation, he indulged in consequence-free promiscuity, or my second business, as he put it, mostly with women he met at Le Club, and what a fabulously creative name that is, an East Side private nightclub known for privileged debauchery. Now I'm curious whether that's a place where we might find associated the name Roger Stone. Just curious about that one. I wonder about that. Let's take a short recess with the tape rolling while I Google that. Roger Stone is a bit of a known swinger himself, so I'm just sort of curious. Actually, sort of rings a bell. Like, didn't he do an interview there? Yeah. That's it. Mentored in the Art of Manipulation. Here's a hit from Salon from 2015. Donald Trump learned from just sort of curious, is that from Roy Cohn? That's a Roy Cohn story, but how does Le Club fit into that one? When Trump was still in his 20s, he hired Cohn and began to move in the same circles. Both were members of Le Club, a private hotspot where the rich and famous and social climbers would meet without suffering the presence of ordinary people. Later, when Studio 54 served the glitter and cocaine crowd, Cohn and Trump were there too. Okay, just to throwing that one out there just to get a little flavor of that. Here's the Roger Stone message. This is, by the way, a piece in Salon in September of 2015. But there's the Roger Stone thing. It was Cohn who introduced Trump to a young political operator named Roger Stone in 1979. Stone had cut his teeth in the Nixon campaign of 72, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, well, I don't see any reference to Stone and Le Club in this one. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there by way of background. Back to the story before I get too distracted. All right, so he's hanging out at Le Club, right? You had drugs, women, and booze all over the effing place. You sound like a really good kid. In 1977, though, Trump married Ivana Winkelmeyer. Wow. How do you like that? A model, and he puts that in scare quotes, from Czechoslovakia, which he could also put in scare quotes now because there is no Czechoslovakia, but back then there was. Shortly after she came to New York from Montreal, where she'd come to promote the 1976 Olympic Games in Canada. That glamorous modeling job was the equivalent of standing in a bikini next to a new car at an auto show. Yeah, not really much of a modeling career. Trump was hardly a model husband. Ivana's friends would later speak of liaisons with figure skater Peggy Fleming. Wow. Sometimes model Catherine Oxenberg, actress Robin Givens, and Georgette Mossbacher and Caroline Rome of Nouvelle Society fame. Before it became an open secret that he was seeing another model, Marla Maples. As a style reporter at the New York Times in the late 1980s, I had Maples' model composite pinned to a wall in my cubicle. Like Ivana and later Melania, Maples was a commercial, as opposed to a high-fashion model, posing for a lesser agency and clients whose closest encounters with Vogue happened at newsstands. After a ski slope confrontation between Ivana and Marla in Aspen in December of 1989, the Trumps broke up raucously, and he married Maples in 1993, shortly after their daughter Tiffany was born. Donald and Marla split in 1997 and were divorced 2 years later. And here the quote, Marla is a good girl, and I had a good marriage with her, but it's just that I get effing bored, Trump told me in that My Generation interview. One of those little things. Shortly after they split, Trump teamed up with Tommaso Butti, one of a pair of Italian entrepreneur brothers, behind the long-defunct Hard Rock clone chain of beaneries, the Fashion Cafe, to open Trump International Models and Talent, a modeling agency. Okay, so now we have the origin of Trump modeling management, the Trump International Models and Talent. So his partner, one of the guys who opened up the long-defunct Fashion Cafe. Interesting. In 1999, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, by then already a noted modelizer himself, was quoted in the Times of London memorably describing Trump's poser business as one-stop date shopping. The plot thickens. In the 21 years since Model was published, his book, unconnected model industry sources have spontaneously told me on at least 3 separate occasions about meet and greet parties Trump threw in a suite at New York's iconic Plaza Hotel during his tenure as its owner, where his wealthy friends, high rollers from his Atlantic City casinos, and potential Trump condominium buyers could meet models wrangled for him by cooperative owners of lesser agencies. Some of the models were a little put off, says a former agency owner, but most likely were not. Interesting. Trump dumped booty after it dumped booty. You like that one? B-U-T-I is how that's pronounced. I'm guessing it has to be booty. Anyway, he dumped them after it emerged that his partner was under investigation by New York Attorney General Eliot Spitzer. Irony alert, that's actually in the text. Irony alert. The booties would later be charged by the United States with conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering in connection with the Fashion Cafe, and the New York Post would subsequently report that Tommaso fled for Italy shortly before his indictment, leaving his then-wife, model Daniela Pestova, behind. I don't know whether she says Pestova or Pestova. Anyway, Daniela can tell me. That's when Trump reorganized his model agency, hiring several top bookers away from John Casablancas' industry-leading Elite agency, named Elite, with capital E, for the renamed Trump Model Management that remains in business today. Trump himself stayed in the model mix too, dating several more, including his one confirmed top model conquest, Cara Young, the ex-wife of photo star Sante D'Orazio. Trump, I have no idea, it rings no bells for me, but Trump once also claimed a liaison with the future First Lady of France, Carla Bruni, though she dismissed that as nonsense, and added that he was obviously a lunatic. Well, that's true. And remember also that this is part of a long line of things he's claimed, including, I could have nailed Princess Di. I don't even know what voice that is anymore. Anyway, finally, he married Melania, as you know, who he met through another minor model agent, Paolo Zempoli, founder of ID Models and a fixture in the Post's Page 6 gossip column. Zempoli's reward was Trump's sponsorship of his career change from model agent to real estate broker. Okay. Sure, why not? Is Paolo Zempoli the guy who shot the nude photo layout of Melania, though? Does that name ring a bell to you guys? I am not 100% sure. Is that let's see, there's the former, I'm reading through the thing. I can't, I think that might be, well, yeah, I think that might be the photographer, although it's not coming up right away, but I bet we can check on. I know we've heard that name before. Anyway, on with the rest of the article. Trump's model agency, by the way, does okay. That's in quotes. That says, that's according to a former agency owner who also confirmed the Plaza parties in a phone call today. Trump's Legends division does better than that, booking old school stars like Carmen del Orifici. That's some name. Karen Alexander, Yasmin Lebon, and believe it or not, Cara Young. Wow. She's still on board. Trump is rarely seen there, though, and unlike model agency pioneer Eileen Ford, he doesn't deign to speak to his staff on the rare occasions when he appears. But it's impossible to judge how often that happens. A staffer says all employees sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements barring them from discussing the man whose name is on the door. So that's just the setup. And I wanted to use that to sort of set the table for this diary at Daily Kos by Swedish Jewfish, whose name I believe has come up before as well. Don't know if we have read a piece by her in the past or not, but certainly the name has caught my eye. And now the title of this piece has. I mentioned it on Friday. We all knew about the trafficking, the untold story of Trump model management, Part 1. And Part 1 of Part 1 here is also a setup. Swedish Jewfish tells us a little bit about how she comes to this story and what it means. Back in July of this year, an article about Trump's modeling company was posted on the Daily Beast. We just read it. It didn't receive much fanfare, nor did these tweets, but let's take a look at them for a moment. Now, they come from a couple of people here. One, Harry Siegel, has this tweet, and I guess the formatting is weird, so let me open it up and see if I can... they're now deleted, so that's really interesting. Harry Siegel, who tweets, I've worked with Trump models casting. That's in scare quotes. Casting, we all knew of the trafficking. And because I can't see the original format of this thing, it's very disturbing. Well, one, that it's deleted. But Harry Siegel, by the way, senior editor of the Daily Beast, and I guess this is too far back to just scroll down to, but it looks like he's quoting Wade Turnbull, who also is on Twitter, or at least was at the time. Let's see if I can't bring up that account. And see if it still exists and is still active. Because it still exists. He is it says here, award-winning freelance executive producer, print and TVC. TVC? I don't even know what that is. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, still active. Still out there and tweeting. Anyway, very interesting. Let's see. So the tweets that Swedish Jewfish has captured here appear to be, I think, quotes of Wade Turnbull passed on to us by Harry Siegel. I've worked with Trump models, casting, we all knew of the trafficking, and then also this one. Asked to explain further, he stated the following. Ready? Wade says, for wealthy businessmen, buying and selling fake contracts. Unfortunately, many model agencies have the same business model. What? And a third tweet, they'd ship in models, Eastern Europeans, who had absolutely no chance of working in New York City. And it becomes a debt slavery or fresh meat. Those tweets came from the account of Wade Turnbull, a highly respected and award-winning Broadway producer with a long history working in the entertainment industry. His remarks echo the sentiments of many who have worked with Trump model management. Turnbull's remarks are notable in particular because of their timing. They were made a full 2 months before the Mother Jones article outlining the immigration fraud, financial exploitation, and generally deplorable working conditions, deplorable, at Trump's agency were made public. It should be noted that Mr. Turnbull, judging by his Twitter feed, is no fan of Hillary Clinton. This is simply his impression based on his experience working with this particular agency, and he is far from alone in his views. Now, Swedish Jewfish writes, about a month ago, I came across a Mother Jones article about Trump's modeling agency and its treatment of a young, largely immigrant workforce. The story was, in a way, the height of irony. Here was a man who built an entire campaign on his hardline stance against immigrants, and all the while his business was committing full-scale immigration fraud. But as I read on, I was struck by how much all this resembled the business model of sex trafficking, something I have researched and written about extensively. I was not alone in my impressions. Others who commented on the Mother Jones piece and the subsequent coverage made similar observations. We certainly did. MSNBC's Chris Hayes commented that Trump models seem to be borderline human trafficking, initially making the comment on Twitter and later on dedicating a segment of his primetime show to exploring the topic. Seth Meyers, for his part, did a segment on the Mother Jones piece as well, comparing it to an episode of Law & Order SVU. While his commentary was cloaked in his usual sardonic humor, Seth's disgust was evident as he wondered aloud if the prospect of Trump harboring sex slaves in his proverbial basement, and if that would be enough to make voters sour on his candidacy. Well, not his fans, anyway. At the time the story broke, I assumed it was going to blow up. I assumed that the follow-up reporting would be done, and it would become the major story of the 2016 election. I thought it might even open up a long overdue dialogue about sex trafficking and how our broken immigration and criminal justice systems enable its existence. But that never happened. To my astonishment, the story disappeared into the ether of the 24/7 news cycle and seemed to be all but forgotten within a week, if that. Barbara Boxer initiated a Senate inquiry, which I've been told is now underway. Mother Jones did a short follow-up, noting that Trump model's the company's only response, was to point out that the story was from many, many years ago. It actually wasn't. Melania Trump sued a relatively unknown Canadian blogger and the Daily Mail over a related story, but otherwise disappeared from public view amid questions about her own strange and inconsistent account of her path to citizenship. And even as Trump ramped up his scathing rhetoric about undocumented immigrants, not one reporter bothered to challenge him on how he squared those public pronouncements with his business practices. Not one reporter asked him how much of his own purported fortune was made on the backs of undocumented immigrants, from his Polish demolition crews to his imported child models, and why that kind of thing was acceptable. The universe basically gave a collective shrug and moved on. And yet, I couldn't. Neither could I, but she actually did something about it. She writes, and so I started researching and writing what I thought would be a decent blog post, perhaps two. But the more I researched, the more I found, and the bigger the story became. I have conducted interviews with models who have worked with Trump's agency and those at rival agencies, but were familiar with his practices and the industry generally. This is a difficult story to write. It's taken me hundreds of hours to slog through the research and even longer to put it together in a coherent way. I've also been hamstrung by the fact that most people who deal with Trump are not willing to speak on the record about their experience with him, especially the very people I had to talk to for this story, who are young and relatively powerless women who signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements and are afraid of the notoriously litigious Trump. I understand their hesitation. This is a dark subject, and it involves powerful people who no doubt have a vested interest in keeping a lot of this out of the public. Indeed, I have never been more afraid to hit publish in my life. My only comfort is knowing that everything I've written is based on factual information. I came to a conclusion about the nature of Trump's activities, but I'm going to stop short of saying what it is and let the facts speak for themselves. Terrific. Let's hear some facts. All right. Because this is a complex story, it is going to be done in several parts, and the installments are going to be long, especially this first one. In order to really understand the information I uncovered, I had to learn about the history of the fashion and modeling industries in order to put it into context. I believe it will be helpful to others as well. It's a different world, and most of us don't ever navigate it. I believe that this is a big part of why this hasn't been picked up before. So, with apologies in advance for the length, and what it might times be some unpolished writing, please read all of this. Please share it with others. Now I feel like I'm doing my part. Terrific. Instead of just interloping on your story. There are many issues that require our attention and many aspects of Trump's business dealings that need to be investigated, but this story is important, and it hasn't ever really been told. I will do my best to tell it with the hopes that other more skilled writers with bigger platforms and more resources can flesh it out further, preferably before November 8th. And on we go. Part 1. The Ugly Business of Beautiful Girls. That's clever. The first thing you need to know about the fashion industry is that everything you see is a lie. The beautiful woman who looks up seductively from the cover of a magazine may very well only be a child. The glamorous lifestyle you imagine models living is, in reality, a grinding, low-wage existence of long hours and slum-like living conditions. Living conditions which, in some cases, have been contractually required. The exorbitant rent charged for that squalor is then directly deducted from any wages they can garner. In some cases, the models may owe significant amounts of money to their agency, making it an average of only $23,000 per year before expenses. The reality of fashion is it's an illusion by design, intended to both trick the customer into thinking they need the items being sold and to sell the lifestyle and glamour of being a model to vulnerable young girls. Once upon a time, the fashion industry was one of the few where women were at the helm. This was not surprising, given that it relies on a consumer market driven by women. So, in days past, while far from perfect, fashion models were at least representative of the average woman in size, stature, and age. And their purpose was to model the clothing that women might want to buy, giving them an idea of how it might look on their own bodies. The modeling agencies of this time were headed mostly by mother hen types, like Eileen Ford, dedicated to standardized pay and curfews for their models. It was a decidedly boring and unsexy, existence, but okay. In the 1970s, the industry began to change. It began moving away from fashion as a utilitarian concept and into a kind of pop culture theater of costumes and performance art, all the while promoting an increasingly unattainable ideal of feminine beauty and blurring the boundaries between women and girls, exploitation and art. There were a number of reasons behind this transformation, but one of the driving forces was the sexual liberation movement and the dark side of its gains. In the words of writer Rebecca Solnit, reflecting on her experiences as a young teen in the 70s, the sexual revolution had deteriorated into a sort of free market, free trade ideology in which all should have access to sex and none should deny access. Pop culture was also influenced by the emergence of Playboy magazine, with its clever use of genuinely good editorial content from respected writers, interspersed with pornographic images, was able to rebrand what had previously been seen as smut into something almost classy. Cloaked in the veneer of sophistication, and by publicly aligning the brand with the causes of feminism, civil rights, and free speech, Hugh Hefner was able to mainstream the objectification of female bodies in a way that had never been done before. He made porn fashionable, and it was only a matter of time before fashion embraced this approach as well. Interesting idea. In the 1970s, Playboy's brand faced competition in the similarly constructed but more explicit Penthouse magazine. Its publisher, Bob Guccione, and Hefner became engaged in a game of one-upsmanship as they competed for customers with increasingly explicit content. Playboy and Penthouse were soon joined by Hustler, which played a role in normalizing the idea of pre- and peri-pubescent girls as sexually desirable and available. It did this with its popular Barely Legal franchise, Yow. But in a more subversive way, it also did this through its comics. In fact, Dwayne Tinsley, Hustler's cartoon editor for 25 years, created one of the most popular recurring characters in the magazine, Chester the Molester, a cartoon which depicted Tinsley's character, Chester, sexually abusing prepubescent girls. Haha, that sounds funny. In 1989, Tinsley's own daughter testified that he molested her, and he was convicted of sexually abusing his daughter, as well as having sexual contact with another 13-year-old girl whose accusations originally led to his arrest. He continued to draw and publish his comics from prison. Oh, well, it's just perfect. But even the sophisticated Playboy would dip its toe into the underage market. Its 1975 issue featured a now infamous set of photos shot by Gary Gross in a series titled Sugar and Spice. Brooke Shields, appeared naked, sitting and standing in a bathtub covered in oil and a full face of makeup. She was 10 years old. I hadn't heard. The photo shoot was part of Gross's work for a larger project, a publication called The Woman in the Child, in which he wanted to reveal the femininity of prepubescent girls by comparing them to adult women. His partner in the project was Playboy Press. Did we not know that was bad news then? All right. I don't know. I don't remember 1970s that way. I was just watching cartoons, man. I don't know. In 1976, the Italian edition of Playboy featured another child pictorial, 11-year-old Eva Ionesco, as photographed by her mother, who she would later sue for profiting off of her exploitation. In a twist of irony, Ionesco, who was eventually taken away from her mother by child welfare officials, was the inspiration for the 1978 film Pretty Baby. The film starred none other than Brooke Shields, then 12, as a child prostitute, complete with nude scenes. All of this, it should be noted, took place while Brooke was signed under Ford Models, who found success in marketing her as the new ideal of feminine beauty. In 1980, Brooke Shields became the youngest model to ever score the cover of Vogue. She was 14 years old. As one might have predicted, the commodification of young girls into sex symbols drew many into the industry with less than noble intentions. Throughout the late 1970s, the industry gradually became gradually taken over by a crowded field of, and here in quotes, playboys, who liked the idea of owning a modeling agency for obvious reasons, but there was no greater success and no single person who transformed the industry more than, it's not Donald Trump, John Casablancas. That name came up earlier, didn't it? Okay, Casablancas was a Brooklyn-born son of a wealthy Spaniard, highly educated and handsome. In the 1970s, he was a notorious playboy living in Milan when he started a relationship with a professional model. His girlfriend, who he would eventually marry, was represented by Ford Models, the #1 agency in the world at the time. Casablancas would eventually work for the company as well as one of their talent agents in Paris. That's some job, right? Through his work and his numerous romances with models, he realized that many of the women were growing restless in the low-wage, unglamorous existence that they had under the stewardship of Eileen Ford, and resented the fact that they often couldn't afford the clothes they were modeling. That's ironic for a Ford, don't you think? Anyway, Ford ran her agency with an iron fist, imposing curfews and morality clauses on her models and insisting on chaperones for photo shoots. It's, in hindsight, not such a bad idea, right? This code of conduct and strict rules were largely informed by Ford's own experiences as a model and her understanding of how predatory the industry could be. She was committed to both protecting her models and making the industry more professional as a whole. And while Ford could be overbearing, she was also a motherly influence and brought in many of the models she represented into her home to nurture them alongside her 4 children and help them navigate the perils of a notoriously exploitative industry. Casablancas, who broke away from Ford and started Elite Model Management in 1972, by contrast, offered, let's say, something different. First, he offered money, much more than models were making under Ford and similar agencies. He also offered the prospect of a more exciting lifestyle, unhindered by curfews or morality clauses, where late-night partying, drug use, and hedonistic pleasures were encouraged. While Ford and her compatriots provided the security of labor protection, such as standardized pay and working hours, Casablancas embraced the increasingly popular principles of unbridled capitalism and neoliberalism, and having sex with him. In exchange for employment security, he gave them an opportunity to earn money commensurate with their commercial success, and the possibilities were endless. Casablancas opened Elite Model and Management in 1972 with a roster of all-star talent, cementing his reputation as a top-tier agency. But within its first year, 2 of his top models were dead. The first was Paula Brenken, who mysteriously dove out a window in a drunken state the night after she told friends she had been raped by a photographer. Very mysterious. The next to die was Emmanuel Dano, who became hooked on drugs soon after signing with Elite. According to Casablancas, she was out for a late-night drive with several male friends when they attempted to rape her and fell out of the moving car while trying to fight off her attackers. He said she died instantly. This story raised quite a few eyebrows, in part because it was John Casablancas who discovered her body lying in her own bed. In both cases, there was little police investigation, despite the suspicious circumstances of these deaths and the fact that the only explanation came from Casablancas. Wow, John Casablancas, a brilliant, complicated man, little movie reference there, a marketing genius, would somehow be able to use those high-profile tragedies as good publicity. His agency became the object of fascination, and stories of his models' exploits became legendary. People in the fashion industry, the media, and the public became obsessed with following their every move, and Casablancas learned the benefits of courting controversy and using media coverage as a marketing tool. In 1977, Casablancas moved his agency headquarters to New York and set about stealing as many Ford girls as he could. Ford struck back, hitting him with a lawsuit for unlawful business practices and beginning a long-running legal battle that would become known as the Model Wars. It's not the most clever name ever, but that's what they called it. For Casablancas, this only solidified his resolve. That's an interesting pronunciation for me. Solidified his resolve. He would not only take Ford's girls, he would make them successful beyond their wildest dreams, and he would become the #1 agency in the world. All right, next section, Playboys and wannabes. Trump in the 1970s. At this time, Donald Trump was working tirelessly to ingratiate himself into the Manhattan social scene with little success. That changed when he met the man who would later become his mentor and closest advisor, Roy Cohn. Remember him? The infamous lawyer who first gained notoriety as a red baiter during the McCarthy hearings. Trump met Cohn in 1973 at Le Club, a members-only East Side hangout. Trump was 27 and had just moved to Manhattan but was still working in Brooklyn at one of his father's company offices. He was a nobody at the time, but he was able to strong-arm the owners of Le Club into a membership, something he did as a way to get to know older, connected, and powerful men like Roy Cohn. At the time, Trump and his father had been slapped with a lawsuit by the Department of Justice for racial discrimination, for refusing to rent out their real estate properties to black families. Trump knew his best shot at getting the feds to back down, was to get a political fixer like Roy Cohn on his side. Cohn would eventually represent the Trumps in a countersuit against the DOJ, and ultimately a settlement would be reached. But that was just the beginning of Trump and Cohn's relationship. Interesting, especially as that came up in the first debate, right? And he said, remember, we settled with the Department of Justice, no admission of guilt, as though that were something that actually meant you were innocent, which it doesn't. But that would have been an interesting counter. Yeah, you were able to settle with no admission of guilt by hiring the infamous and disgusting Roy Cohn, who you only got to represent you because you were able to cultivate a mentor-mentee relationship with him doing God knows what at Le Club in the 70s. So, could you make it a little sleazier, please? Why don't you come back to us next debate and make it worse? All right, where do we leave off? The beginning of Trump and Cohn's relationship, right? Though Cohn had ostensibly been retained by Donald to handle a single piece of litigation, Wayne Barrett, an investigative journalist for New York's Village Voice, would write in his 1992 book about the Trump family. He began in the mid-'70s to assume a role in Donald's life far transcending that of a lawyer. He became Donald's mentor, his constant advisor on every significant aspect of his business and personal life. Through Cohn, Trump gained access to Manhattan's drug-fueled disco scene, of which Cohn was a fixture. Cohn would become the legal advisor to Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, the owners of Studio 54, where Trump would spend much of the 1970s. That's really a hell of a way to put it. Much of the decade spent at Studio 54. During this period, Trump engaged in such excess of promiscuity that he deemed it my second business, according to author Michael Gross, whose piece we just read. Later, he would tell Howard Stern that his exploits and their inherent risk of sexually transmitted disease were, you'll recall, his, quote, personal Vietnam. Trump reminisced to Gross about his time, this time of his life, years later. You had drugs, women, and booze all over the effing place, Mr. Classy said. If I hadn't got married, who knows what would have happened. In case anybody missed his point, he would later clarify, I don't think anybody had more sex than I did. Of course. He had to throw that one in. Sex was all over the effing place. Nobody did better than me. I was the best. I was the best one there was. He would also describe the typical night at Studio 54 this way. I would watch supermodels getting screwed. Well-known supermodels getting screwed. Not the crappy kind of supermodels, apparently. On a bench in the middle of the room. There were 7 of them, and each one was getting screwed by a different guy. This is... Okay, all right, you're the president. You win. This is getting closer to idiocracy every day, and right down to the porn star part of this. And didn't we read just the other day that he wasn't in porn per se, but that he made appearances in these stupid Playboy films or whatever? Anyway, that was the one missing element of idiocracy, besides that and watering plants with Gatorade. Anyway, such was the life that Donald Trump had in the late 70s. In a way, it was a life not at all that dissimilar to Casablancas, yet with 2 considerable differences. One, Casablancas was a self-made man who was naturally charming, attractive, and navigated the celebrity and social scene with ease. Donald Trump was not. In fact, Trump had a personality that most people in the elite circles he wanted to belong to, found off-putting, to say the least. But perhaps the greatest difference between the 2 men was John Casablancas was famous and Trump was not. How do you like that? What an interesting way to start. Nevertheless, Trump and Casablancas would cross paths at some point during the 1970s, most likely through Roy Cohn, who was involved in the suit between Elite and Ford. And they would form decades-long friendship, and later a formal partnership that would end up influencing many of his future career choices and inform his style of interacting with the media. Casablancas' influence on Trump becomes obvious when reading about both men. I think we got an inkling of it earlier, and it pretends quite a bit, but has been largely forgotten by history. If you count this as history. It happened. Anyway, as they approached the end of the 1970s, the 2 men were on very different trajectories. Trump met and started dating Czech model, wow, look at this name they give her here, Ivana, I thought it was like Winkle something or other last time, right? Wasn't it? This is Ivana, oh my God, it's Czechoslovakian. Zelničkova, I'm going to guess, Zelničkova. I'm not sure how you deal with this. Anyway, a woman who, despite his later claims that she was a supermodel, was in reality barely making a living, posing in her bikini at trade shows at the time they met. Ivana and Trump would marry in 1978, and their first child, Donald Jr., remember him, would be born 8 months later. Oh my. Well, you know, these things happen. While Trump set about his life as a not particularly involved husband and father, John Casablancas became a staple of the New York gossip circuit, where his dalliances with the most beautiful women in the world were splashed across page 6 every week, and his high-class lifestyle became the stuff of legend. Casablancas himself, young, undeniably handsome, and increasingly wealthy, was no doubt the envy of many men at the time. Furthermore, he was untouchable. During his glory days, he would be accused of rape, murder, and everything in between, and it never seemed to affect him personally or professionally. Now here, a quote from Bad and Beautiful, Inside the Dazzling and Deadly World of Supermodels. My goodness. Casablancas didn't care what the media said about him, just as long as they spelled his name right, said entertainment critic Thomas Mann. He knew how to play the media to a T and was a master at turning any publicity he got into dollars. The craziest part is, he didn't have to spend a dime marketing himself. The press followed him wherever he went and became obsessed with every detail of his life. A little bit of additional bolding there by Swedish Jewfish, I think. That rings a bell, don't you think? Now back to her own account. And while Trump entered his long period of reckless business deals and marital strife, Casablancas was becoming an international star, credited with creating the supermodel, like the concept of supermodel. With his stable of women, both the ones he poached from rival agencies and a growing roster of mostly young teenage girls recruited by his team of less than reputable international talent scouts, he embraced his reputation for risk-taking and debauchery. After signing Cindy Crawford in 1988, he encouraged her to pose for Playboy magazine as a way to expand her brand. I don't want to see you naked, I just want to expand your brand. That's all. Yeah, sure. The ensuing publicity led to a job as host of the MTV show House of Style and her iconic Super Bowl ad for Pepsi. I don't know if I would describe her career trajectory quite that way, but I guess that's all true. I mean, there was a time in between where she was one of the top models in the world and working everywhere. But okay, in 1995, she topped the Forbes list of highest paid models, earning $6.5 million. The era of the supermodel had begun. Donald Trump, for his part, was becoming increasingly restless and reckless. Despite fathering 3 children and having a devoted wife, by all accounts, he didn't spend much time with any of them, preferring work and play to the routines of domestic life. In the 80s, he made at least 2 life-changing decisions. One, to step out on his wife publicly, and to expand his negligible empire into Atlantic City casinos. He built Harrah's at Trump Plaza in 84, and even that is questionable, I think. Remember that everything we've read about most of his casino endeavors, he bought other people's work already in progress and sometimes finished it, but all right. And a partially completed building that became Trump Castle in 85, a property that would be managed by his first wife, Ivanka. He also scooped up the Taj Mahal in 88, which cost $1.1 billion in the transaction and made it the most expensive casino ever built at the time. Somewhere along the line, during this time period, Trump appears to have hardened and grown cynical. Despite all his efforts, by most accounts he was never really accepted by the Manhattan social crowd. No matter how many buildings he put his name on, or how many millions he was worth, he was still always seen as a bit of a joke. Over time, his resentment grew and simmered into anger, and his actions became increasingly fueled by his need to settle scores. According to the accounts of his business partners at Harrah's, he was not well suited for the gambling world and was nothing more than an off-puttingly rude presence on the casino floor, often becoming angry at the very high rollers who make such industries incredibly lucrative in the first place, and demanding they leave if they were too far ahead of the house in their betting. Well, that'll end your relationship with them right quick. Trump became steeped in excess, making extravagant purchases such as a private jet, which he decorated with his name emblazoned across the fuselage, and yet was so cheap that he refused to fly in VIP clients, even those who were prepared to put up millions of dollars in bets, because he didn't want to waste the gas, and he was concerned over the prospect of them using his gold-plated toilets and introducing him to strange germs. You can get another plane, dude. Anyway, as his Atlantic City escapades began, Trump was in the midst of at least one torrid affair with a 20-year-old beauty queen, no less, named Marla Maples. She was trying unsuccessfully to break into show business. In an attempt to keep first wife Ivana distracted from his dalliances, he would put her in charge of his Trump Castle property, a job for which she was given a salary, as he boasted, of $1 a year, and all the dresses she could buy. With Ivana distracted, he became increasingly hot and heavy with Marla, who he put up in a condo at Trump Tower and controlled every aspect of her social life, because that's not weird or disgusting. I thought I would mention that. In the meantime, his relationship with Ivana deteriorated, culminating in a now iconic ski slope showdown in Aspen between his wife and his girlfriend. And according to a sworn deposition that she gave during the divorce, which she would publicly distance herself from later, said Donald brutally raped her. And the excerpt, now we've actually seen that. It was one of the opening salvos in his candidacy, really, and our introduction to his now lawyer, Michael Cohn, right? After a painful scalp reduction surgery to remove a bald spot, Donald Trump confronted his then-wife, who had previously used the same plastic surgeon. "Your effing doctor has ruined me," Trump cried. What happened to the Dr. Burstein? I know he's a gastroenterologist, but can't he do it all? What followed was a violent assault, according to Lost Tycoon. Donald held back Ivana's arms and began to pull out fistfuls of hair from her scalp as if to mirror the pain he felt from his own operation. He tore off her clothes and unzipped his pants. All right, he rapes her. This is more descriptive than we really need to be, except that she does say, according to versions she repeats of the story to some of her closest confidants, he raped me. That's what's in Lost Tycoon. All right. Following the incident, Ivana ran upstairs, hid behind a locked door, and remained there crying for the rest of the night. When she returned to the master bedroom in the morning, he was there. As she looks in horror at the ripped-out hair scattered all across the bed, he glares at her and asks with menacing casualness, "Does it hurt?" Yeah, so we all remember the discussion of that one. Trump, perhaps inspired by the successes of John Casablancas in earned media, decided to turn the ending of his first marriage into a Greek tragedy for the ages. New personas were created in the form of publicists that sounded uncannily like Donald Trump himself. These personas called reporters to scoop them on, to fill them in on the scoop of salacious details of his exploits. Trump and or his alter ego / publicist would call Page 6 reporter Liz Smith and others incessantly to let them know that Mr. Trump, while still technically married and already carrying on a serious relationship with his mistress, was nonetheless the object of unbridled desire by the most beautiful women on the planet, who he apparently had to beat off with a stick. Madonna was chasing him around like a dog in heat. He was bedding literally dozens of models, a different one every day of the week. Kim Basinger was among his many conquests. And Carla Bruni, at the time one of the most high-profile supermodels in the world, was pursuing him to the point that restraining orders might end up necessary. Such was the sexual magnetism of the Donald in the late 80s, early 90s. And, that was to hear him, or rather, publicist John Barron say it. Of course, the fake publicist ruse eventually caught up with him. Page 6 reporters were all too familiar with the voice of Donald Trump, as was Marla Maples, who they played the tape for to confirm. And eventually, Trump would admit that the story about Carla Bruni was really just a way to get his long-suffering mistress jealous. And yet, despite the fact that the ostensible relationship was entirely fictional, Trump has continued to act like he did in fact have an affair with Carla Bruni. As recently as 2008, in an interview with Howard Stern, he played coy when asked about his past dalliances with Bruni, who went on to become the First Lady of France after marrying Nicolas Sarkozy. Sarkozy, if you will. It made he also made the now infamous comment about her less than impressive breasts, saying it's very hard to be a 10 when you're flat-chested. Bruni, for her part, vehemently denied that she was ever romantically involved with Trump and said she felt humiliated by the story. Indeed, she had a very different account of their one and only encounter. As she remembered it while in New York for a charity event, Donald Trump tracked her down at her hotel and tried to get in her pants. That's the relationship for you. Thoroughly uninterested and annoyed, Carla would ultimately trick Trump into paying for a master's suite in the hotel where she was staying, a suite where Carla and her friends spent the next few days ordering room service and gloating over the way they fooled the king of tacky. She speculated it may have been in retaliation for her rejection that Trump planted the story that they were romantically involved. A year later, she would sum up the entire scandal in one perfect sentence: Trump has always obviously been a lunatic. Trump's bizarre behavior around Carla and women generally turns out to have been fairly typical for Donald Trump. In fact, it gives us quite an interesting glimpse into his personality. You see, despite his attempts to portray himself as Don Juan, he really didn't have much in the way of game, at least according to those who know him. In all honesty, Donald is completely awkward with women. A Trump insider told the New York Daily News in a July 2016 interview he never developed small talk. He's not very social. He doesn't have any friends. Plus, he's completely paranoid about venereal disease and AIDS. In light of this, and considering the other things that were going on in his life, I will make an observation. Trump has been in the public eye for around 30 years, and his personal life, including romantic dalliances, have been exhaustively covered. Yet, within those multiple decades in the public eye, there is a period of little under 5 years in which Trump faced multiple accusations of sexual harassment and assault. To me, at least, the high number of accusations within a short time period are striking, as are similarities between each woman's account. His alleged rape of his first wife, Ivanka, takes place in 1989, late 1989. He was accused of sexually harassing a model in 1992. A lawsuit filed by Jill Harth alleged ongoing sexual misconduct, including an attempted rape over the course of 2 months spanning 1993 and 1994. Time out just to remind you that is the woman, along with her then husband, I believe, who were working out a deal for Trump to own/sponsor yet another, I think this would have been the fourth beauty pageant that he was trying to acquire. The American Dream pageant, a garbage thing that put out a bikini calendar, basically. But of course, bikini, so he wanted to be involved in that. And to return to, oh, by the way, before I even return to the story, this woman, Jill Harth, I guess, that was the one we read about. Long-time listeners of the show will remember when we read from Law News with a Z. That was her story. By the way, I have since seen, I imagine, it's a cache of emails that I imagine was released by the Trump team, whether it was the campaign or the organization, I'm not sure. I guess they released it in an attempt to try and discredit her, and it works with me, a little bit anyway. She hasn't dropped her suit, but in the early days of the campaign, she is still constantly emailing Trump organization schedulers and executive assistants, some of whom we've mentioned on the air before. Remember, Rona Graff is one of them. Basically begging for an opportunity to get backstage at one of his rallies and talk to him and see if she can't convince him to sign her for doing makeup for him. Apparently she's concerned that he's too orange, which she's correct about. And it was driving her crazy, and she's a makeup artist now. And anyway, she was still looking to get contracts out of Trump and trade on their relationship. So, I mean, people are weird. I don't know. I mean, maybe the story is true and she also wanted to get a contract. I don't really know. But it had the effect of undermining her claims in my mind, I guess I'd have to say. Or rather, undermining her, I don't know what, trustworthiness. To me, I still believe that he did this to her and that her story is correct. And that she's weird enough to say, but I'd like to get some money too. And pretend I like Donald while I do it. I don't know, people are strange. Look back earlier in this piece about, or was it the other piece from the Daily Beast, about the model he had an affair with, but who still works for his agency. I don't know what to tell you about people. They're weird. But now moving on to a more serious subject, there was also the alleged rape of the 13-year-old girl, which Swedish Jewfish, our writer here, says I will discuss in more detail in the next installment. And that was reported as taking place in early 1994. So it is kind of a cluster there, isn't it? As far as I'm aware, no other allegations have surfaced, although women in both in his employ and personal life have spoken out about his continued inappropriate behavior and comments. 1989 to 1985 just so happens to be the same period in which Donald Trump's world and empire are falling apart at the seams. In the beginning of the decade, he was facing the end of his first marriage and a looming court battle. Despite his purportedly active dating life, but by many accounts, Trump was being rejected by many, if not most, of the women he pursued, including Carla Bruni and Jill Hurth. What was it? I can't recall whether it was Hurth or Heath. I mean, yeah, Hearth. Okay. It's spelled differently in this one. Harth. Yeah, okay. Well, anyway. Where were we with that one? Marla Maples, after years of being the secret mistress and then repeated rounds of being dumped and publicly humiliated by Trump, was starting to lose her patience. And the big gamble he took in Atlantic City was, by all accounts, failing miserably, a direct result of his jaw-droppingly awful business practices and general incompetence. Just to get that dig in there. In 1991, his Taj Mahal casino filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In 1992, he again filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, this time on the Trump Plaza Hotel, also in Atlantic City, and at the time owed $550 million. Recall that he would report an almost $1 billion loss on his 1995 tax returns, according to the copies obtained by the New York Times. Indeed, the early 90s were not a very good era for Donald Trump. In light of this fact, it's worth noting that the sexual assault allegations against him are all clustered within this very time frame. Now on to this next section, Casablancas in the 1980s, the beginning of the end. For his part, John Casablancas enjoyed continued success throughout most of the 1980s, building the largest and most profitable modeling agency in the world. But beneath the glitz and glamour of his supermodels and lifestyle lurked a much darker reality. Once his agency was established, Casablancas embarked on creating a kind of hierarchy, a multi-tiered system that his prospects would have to navigate in order to be signed. Casablancas would ultimately turn over the day-to-day control of his agency to his business partner and focus most of his time and energy on his New Faces division, meeting dozens of aspiring models a day in the comfort of his corner office, away from prying eyes. It was in this private setting that Casablancas began the tradition of weighing and measuring girls, which soon became widespread throughout the industry. It was a practice that served the dual purpose of allowing agencies to closely monitor any weight gain and created a pretense for agents to meet with young models alone in their offices and require them to strip nude so that you can be weighed accurately. It's not, that's just, it works out. It's a business model. The tier system incentivized doing whatever it took to get to the top, a perch which 99% of the young girls scouted and brought before Casablancas would never reach. There would be only a handful of models who could wake up for nothing less than $10,000 a day, after all. But the possibility was tantalizing, and Casablancas was a skilled groomer who lavished every one of his models with attention and made them feel like they had the potential to reach the top. This created a power dynamic that had previously not existed. Among models, it was understood that John Casablancas could make you a star. It was also understood that he could ruin you. The system worked for a while, but it was foiled by the fact that the playboys, in particular John Casablancas, were used to living by a different set of rules and never being held accountable. None of these men were shy about their behavior, and the fact that they were betting models as young as 12 on a routine basis was well known. But in the 1980s, the cultural tides started to turn against them. With increased awareness of sexual child abuse, both its alarming prevalence and its devastating effects on victims, attitudes began to change, and the public became less tolerant of famous men and their dalliances with children. What do you know? Soon enough, John Casablancas and his fellow playboys would find themselves embroiled in increasingly distasteful scandals involving underage girls. I don't think I ever recall that there might have been a time when it wasn't socially, I've structured my sentence incorrectly, but it wasn't child molestation always problematic? I guess not. I guess when you think back to like the Roman Polanski thing, and is there a legitimate chance for these guys at saying, well, it was a different time? God. On to our next section here. In 1984, John Casablancas met then 14-year-old Stephanie Seymour, oh my, at his newly launched Look of the Year contest for Elite. Casablancas selected Seymour as the local winner, but declared her a bit too undeveloped for his personal tastes. If I looked at anyone with interest, it was her mom, he said, and so she was shipped back off to Florida to start her sophomore year at high school. Ugh. Throughout the year, Seymour continued to write to Casablancas. The kid was delightful, he said of their correspondence. She would send little letters, and when you opened the letter, little silver stars would fall out. Oh, sad. And Casablancas responded to her correspondence personally, urging her to come back to New York and join his agency once school let out. At the end of her sophomore year, she did just that, and by this time, she was finally up to Casablancas' exhausting standards. By that time, her body was extraordinary. She was long and thin, and the shapes were where they had to be, and her face was gorgeous with this innocent little child voice, he said in an interview before being arrested, explaining his lust over a young girl a girl young enough to be his grandchild. And there's a nice little picture here of Stephanie Seymour at age 15 with John Casablancas, with his shirt open and hairy chest out and cigarette dangling out of his mouth and puffy eyes half closed. It's just terrific. On the night of her 16th birthday, John Casablancas threw Stephanie Seymour a party at a cocaine-fueled nightclub in Milan, presenting her with a goblet of milk and a plate of cookies. 1 week later, he would move in with her. I have to go jump out a window now. Casablancas' affinity for very young girls was not a secret. In fact, it was legendary within the fashion industry and the social scene in New York City long before it became public knowledge. I really have a bit of Pygmalion syndrome, he admitted in an interview, before discussing how he encouraged one of his 17-year-old new face girls to lose weight by telling her that he was really turned off by her body. The Pygmalion effect, or Rosenthal effect, is the phenomenon whereby higher expectations lead to an increase in performance. The effect is named after the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he had carved. Got it? Okay. Thank you for the notes there. Swedish Jewfish, very useful. Always helpful to have the correct cultural background on that. By the time New York Magazine did a front-page profile of him in 1988, Casablancas' reputation for bedding young models was established and begrudgingly accepted, a price to pay in exchange for his, quote, genius within the New York social scene, but the expose came as a shock to many outside the bubble. Again, I guess your Roman Polanski, or for that matter, Woody Allen situation. John Casablancas would soon find out that he was not as untouchable as he first thought he was. In the article, which ran under the title Girl Crazy, Casablancas was portrayed as a champagne-guzzling pervert, singularly dedicated to the new look department of Elite, where he spent his days ogling the scantily clad, sometimes naked bodies of teenage girls. In light of Donald Trump's more alarming comments and decisions around his daughter Ivanka, this quote stands out. Casablancas talked about his 17-year-old daughter, Cecile. He said Cecile had been solicited by a photographer last summer on a beach in Ibiza. The photographer asked her to pose in a bikini, and Casablancas raced over to try to get a $2,000 fee for the shot. She's got a great little body, he told his models. I thought, oh my God, I know what this photographer is up to. I got to put a stop to it. But in fact, he runs over and asks for a $2,000 fee. Wow, what a guy. Another quote that brings a chuckle and a nod of recognition, that I got a little bile out of that one, but in this story is Casablancas' bizarre pride over never having changed a diaper. That is curiously similar. Donald Trump would make similar boasts in a Howard Stern interview a few years later. Sounds like he heard the story and thought it was cool, Compelling proof this is not, but I do believe it's a hint of the kind of Don Juan persona that Don, far from a Juan, actually a dejected, balding husband with a crumbling empire. I guess Girl Crazy marked the beginning. Looks like the formatting has gone a little goofy here, but I guess she was trying to say compelling proof it isn't, but it certainly looks like a guy who's really basically, as she says, a dejected, balding husband with a crumbling business empire decides, yeah, I wish I was that guy. I'm going to tell his stories. Girl Crazy, that profile in New York, right, marked the beginning of John Casablancas' downfall. The article became a huge scandal, that reverberated far beyond the modeling industry and into the mainstream press. It was especially visible in New York City, where Elite had its headquarters and where Casablancas lived and was an active part of the social scene. Certainly, without a doubt, it would have gotten around to Donald Trump. But the scandal did not end there, nor did it begin. I guess in the same place. Neither began nor ended there. Could use a little bit of editing here. We were warned about the writing. Less than a month earlier, 60 Minutes aired a primetime special on the abuses of underage girls in the modeling industry. Investigative reporter Craig Pies portrayed the modeling industry as infested with agents who were notorious hustlers and playboys. Play your cards right, honey. His report revealed that both Claude Haddad, the head of European scouting for Ford, and Ford's Paris-based agent Jean-Luc Brunel, had been accused of horrific sexual misconduct by many models. The special aired the interviews of dozens of women who accused both Brunel and Haddad of a litany of crimes ranging from racist invective towards black models to violent rape. And in fact, the hidden camera footage captured in filming the special caught it all, from Javier lamenting about N-word models to Haddad chuckling about drugging and raping 13-year-old girls. At a retreat, soon after the 1-2 punch delivered by the coverage, Haddad, Jean-Luc Brunel, and Casablancas were once again overheard, albeit not taped this time around, laughing about their crimes. Alternatively, they were angry when confronted by interim scouting manager Trudy Tapscott. "I'm a man and I have needs. I will not apologize for that," Casablancas is said to have declared. Thinking a little bit about Roger Ailes here, too. There was, to be fair, fallout from these reports. Brunel and Haddad were condemned by Eileen Ford, and Casablancas never fully regained his public reputation. But the public and the insular world of fashion are very different animals, and within the latter, the only repercussions any of the men faced was in retribution for airing the industry's dirty laundry with their sloppiness. Haddad and Brunel kept their jobs, albeit not in an official capacity, and while Casablancas was removed from his official role as head of the New Faces division of Elite, where he had had unrestrained access and influence over the youngest and most impressionable girls represented by his agency, he didn't go very far. His unofficial capacity was far-reaching, and his behaviors were explained away by his replacements. One of the agents taking his place was Trudy Tapscott, the same woman who had tried unsuccessfully to confront John after his forced retirement. While initially she was furious at Casablancas, less than a year later, she had softened her stance. People in this business use their power to manipulate people in ways that are unfair, she admitted, but she told the many parents who were concerned about Casablancas, who still retained an unofficial role in the division, that he was not a manipulator. "My answer is that no one ever did anything they didn't want to," she stated. "I'm amazed how these girls act in certain situations. They know more about making passes at men than I ever do." Over time, Donald Trump would emerge from the ruins of his empire with a new approach to business and a new source of income. In 1996, he bought the rights to the Miss Universe franchise and became the central figure in the running of these pageants. And in 1999, he started a modeling agency, T Models, later changed to Trump Model Management. The correlation of interest is quite clear. For a man awkward around women but dependent on his public image saying otherwise, a stable of women under his employ was a way to boost his image, and even better, he was able to lock all of these women into non-disclosure agreements, ensuring that his behavior with them had little chance of becoming public knowledge. It also appeared to have served as a useful tool regarding his business transactions, which, in the aftermath of his bankruptcy, were increasingly dependent on some less than savory characters. How he did this and the breadth of his activity will be explored in the next installment. But for the time being, there is one final aspect of this story that is breathtaking and speaks more to the character of Donald Trump than anything else. The section is called Ivanka. Here, an excerpt from New York Magazine's December 18th, 1995 issue. 14-year-old Ivanka, the suddenly ravishing mini-babe who seems like one of those kids from soap operas, 4 years old one day, 19-year-old the next, is starting to model. Donald is particularly enthusiastic. 7 years had passed since John Casablancas had appeared on the cover of New York Magazine, declaring his love for underage girls, and Donald and Ivana had made a decision. Their daughter, Ivanka, would become a model. Despite a widespread belief that she was too young, too naive, and wasn't quite aesthetically suited for the industry, Ivanka Trump was nonetheless able to get signed at a major agency. At the tender age of 13, she signed on with the New Look department of Elite Model Management, under the tutelage of none other than John Casablancas. He's really looking out for Ivanka there. It seems that Monica Pillard, the president of Elite, has been eyeing Ivanka since she spotted her on her father's lap 4 years ago when Mr. Trump was a judge of a new talent contest for the agency. This according to a New York Times report, by the way. Mr. Trump and Elite have a long-standing informal relationship. Ms. Pillard served as a judge in the Miss Universe pageant, which is jointly owned by Mr. Trump and CBS, as is the Miss Teen USA pageant. John Casablancas, Elite's founder, is a friend of Mr. Trump's, and Elite has held events at Trump Tower in Manhattan. Isn't that fantastic? By the way, who else lives in Trump Tower? Well, remember, that is the frat house where Stewie Rara also lives and holds his parties, and I guess the origin of his limousine sex tape escapades. Check out Sex Tape, everybody. Yeah, they all live there together. And yes, by the way, in his time, Stewie Rara has been a judge of one, at least, of Donald Trump's pageants. It's all just sort of favors he sprinkles around. You know what? You're going to keep your mouth shut? Be a judge at one of my pageants. Yes, Donald Trump decided to entrust his daughter, that's good, there should be scare quotes about that one, to this man. Yes, Casablancas still had his job. He could weather charges of tax evasion and class action lawsuit, but eventually his past caught up with him. That's good to know. In 2002, he was sued by a former model who alleged that Casablancas had raped her when she was 15 and then forced her to get an abortion. The lawsuit was settled for an undisclosed amount, and in 2003, Elite Model Management officially declared bankruptcy. Despite the fact that Ivanka largely flopped as a model, Donald Trump would continue to brag about her physical beauty, physique, and ostensibly prolific modeling career. He would also go on to unceremoniously dump Marla Maples, his long-suffering mistress, having become his reluctant second bride, and shut her down with legal arrangements that both forbade her from saying a negative word about him in public for all time and ensured she got next to nothing in spousal and child support. Maples agreed to this despite the fact that she had already raised their daughter, Tiffany, almost entirely on her own. In fact, until his presidential run, Trump had not shown a modicum of fatherly interest in her life aside from the bizarre speculation when she was merely a baby about her future breast size and compliments of her 1-year-old legs on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Over a decade later, in one of his few public acknowledgments of her existence, he would smirk as he admitted to Howard Stern that he had urged Marla to abort her. Wow, I don't think I remember that one. In the meantime, I'm boggled by that one. In the meantime, Elite and Ford collapsed on... I can't even go on. It's not like I'm so disturbed by abortion or anything, but I mean... Didn't Trump, like in one of his initial outings, I recall that he he gave a speech somewhere, and it was my first introduction to his style in a political context, where he just would fabricate or seemed to be fabricating stories, where he was talking about abortion, and he asked him about abortion, and he told some story. I know a couple, they have this child, beautiful child, terrific, tremendous kid, just a terrific kid, and I know that when she was pregnant, they were thinking of aborting this baby, and I urged them not to, and they didn't, and now she's a terrific kid. That was like the sum total of his philosophical thought on abortion. Now I wonder whether that was just him. I don't know. In the meantime, Elite and Ford collapsed under the weight of their scandals, creating a vacuum of talent to cash in on. A cast of shady characters and playboys were drawn in, eager to capitalize on the power, social status, and potential fortune that could be found in the business of beautiful girls. As Ford lost her grip on power, for better or worse, so died the last vestiges of an honor code within the modeling world. While the one that existed was without teeth, it still marked a change. During this time, the supermodel era also came to an end. No model since has ever dared to suggest that there was a price tag attached to her presence. Modesty, in terms of value and talent, became synonymous with greed and hubris. The fact that models, even supermodels, never gained the riches that they were born of their starved bodies and faces didn't matter. The fact that the largest spoils went to the very men who were caught on hidden camera laughing about raping underage girls didn't matter. The industry was, like so many others, an unregulated Wild West, and into this fray came numerous playboys and would-be kings. Jean-Luc Brunel, the unwitting star of the BBC undercover investigation, started MC2. Claude Haddad, his co-star, started DNA. Paolo Zampoli, who we will talk about in the next installment, started ID. And Michael Adam Lisowski started Fashion TV. And Donald J. Trump started Trump Model Management. All of these individuals and companies are, as it turns out, inextricably linked in ways that leave little doubt of the nature of their business. The fashion industry, as exploitative and morally ambiguous as it is on its very surface, is in fact merely the rock that covers an ecosystem of underground creatures beneath. This ecosystem will be explored and laid bare in my next post. Boy, I can't wait. This is a story that must be told in layers and parts. Doing a great job with it so far. It involves oligarchs and diplomats, tax evasion, and trafficking of drugs, weapons, and human beings. But for now, it is important to explore the surface because it is the most easily understood, provable, and in many ways it's the most telling when it comes to the character of the man who wants to be president. And there are a myriad of important questions to ask knowing the facts thus far. What kind of man seeks out, pursues friendships and business partnerships with a man who is unabashed in his predilection for underage girls? Who openly admits he prefers them young because they are easily manipulated? John Casablancas was, quote, girl crazy and proud of it. His reputation was legendary. Imagine for a moment that John Casablancas was doing this type of thing with boys of the same age. Imagine he was inviting young teenagers to his private office, having them stripped down to near or complete nudity, inspecting their bodies, talking about how he thought they were sexy, sending them off to Europe to get them broken in, and falling in love with them. The ages of the girls he preyed on is not all that far off from the ages of the boys that Jerry Sandusky abused, and we all readily acknowledge that's wrong. Joe Paterno was widely and rightfully condemned for turning a blind eye to what was happening, but when it's 14-year-old girls, why does anyone, including Trump, who continued to do business with him, get a pass? And why is this the first time, to my knowledge, that Trump's association with John Casablancas has even been questioned in the public sphere? That'd make a hell of a town hall question. And for that matter, what kind of man throws his 14-year-old daughter into this den of wolves? Plausible deniability isn't going to work on this one. Donald Trump knew about the state of the industry. He knew that it was a cesspool of drug abuse and sexual exploitation. Why would he sign his underage daughter with, of all people, John Casablancas? Anyone who was tangentially connected with the modeling industry was well aware of the scandals that plagued him. His relationship with Stephanie Seymour, his unrelenting desire for more young girls, And furthermore, they knew that Casablancas' attitude was far from an outlier, that in fact, the industry was rife with people exactly like him and hopelessly corrupted by their influence. This was not obscure knowledge. It was the subject of a national broadcast. It was an industry-wide embarrassment. It was a front-page story. Donald Trump knew the reputation of elite. He knew the reputation of the industry. He knew that it was ripe hunting ground for young, impressionable girls. He knew that drugs were rampant and frequently pushed on models as they were hired under the guise of entertainment, of guests. In fact, he admitted as much when he was asked about it in his New York Times interview. He says, "This is an interesting case," he says over the speakerphone, which was not on a boat, but rather in his office. I'm not sure how that comes up in the context of this interview. I am only modestly in favor of this because I understand that life is a very fast life and that age, it is always a risky proposition. What does that word salad even mean? I don't know. What did Trump do? Did he recoil in horror? Did he disavow any further dealings with these people? No. If you as a parent knew all of this about the fashion industry, modeling in particular, what would you do if your child, 13 at the time, announced that she wanted to become a model? By all accounts, it does not appear that Ivanka was even the driving force behind the decision to start modeling. In fact, reading old profiles of Trump, it's abundantly clear that both he and Ivanka were excited and invigorated by the prospect of their little girl being on the catwalk and in the pages of Vogue. They promoted her tirelessly, especially Donald. He bragged to anyone who would listen about how beautiful Ivanka was, often remarking on her body. He sought affirmation from others when he asked if they, including a judge for Miss USA and others, thought his daughter was hot. Trump is invested in this idea of his daughter as sexually desirable. I suppose it lends credence to his superior genes theory in a way, but even a eugenicist would be able to talk about their progeny in a way that doesn't reduce them to their sex appeal. Every father in the country, at least the ones who don't have some underlying pathology, understands that fixating on your own daughter's body, her hotness, let alone thinking about her sex life vis-a-vis your own, and even joking about dating her, is downright bizarre. An outrageous comment, a joke that falls flat, but it happens. But this isn't the one-off. This is a pervasive pattern of behavior and a reflection of belief. Most men do not talk about their daughters this way. Not when they are adults. Not when they are teenagers. Certainly not when they are infants, as he did when it came to Tiffany and her legs and future breasts. And most fathers care enough about their daughters not to thrust them into an industry rife with abuse, placing them under the control of a man known to take advantage of his underage charges. This is the basic criteria for being a decent human being and the bare minimum to be a competent parent. You don't expose your children to this. You protect them from it. Donald Trump is apparently incapable of even rising to that most basic standard of decency. But then again, we learned that John Casablancas was as well. When the photographer comes up, what does he want? To protect her? No, he wants a fee. And maybe that's it. Donald thought he could collect fees. In fact, many people and many companies decided not to work with Casablancas at all after his private behavior became public. Whether it was a moral stance or a business decision, they determined he was toxic and should be avoided at all costs. Many people were able to see that associating with Casablancas would not reflect well on their character and that any young woman they put in his presence would be at risk. And so, this is the sad epilogue of John Casablancas, the man, the legend, the rather morally bankrupt human being. With his career and reputation in tatters, he moved to Brazil and tried to become a new man. It was there in Brazil that he met a high school junior from the slums of Sao Paulo who would eventually become his third and final wife. Casablancas, 51 at the time, met the 17-year-old at, where else? The Elite Look of the Year competition, which he was able to export to Brazil with the help of friends like Trump and Trump's matchmaker and future business partner, Paolo Zampoli. Once again, Donald Trump was in attendance for the contest, sitting on the judges' panel, smirk on his face, beaming, ready and eager to assert dominance. But where John Casablancas ended up at the end of his life is sadly ironic, considering where our story began. This, an excerpt from a 2004 New York Times piece. The amount of money you have, especially in the region around Sao Paulo, is absolutely mind-boggling, said John Casablancas, the modeling mogul. You can be so elitist and so selective that you can focus on the upper crust of the upper crust. Mr. Casablancas, who sits on the board at Trump Realty Brazil and calls himself a lifestyle consultant of sorts for the resort's planning committee, predicts that Villa Trump will be such a success that it will end up having to turn people away. This from a piece entitled Trump Takes a Meeting, Now Backs a Resort in Brazil from 2004. Yes, John Casablancas, role model and rival to Donald Trump, the man who possessed the natural charm that Trump could never have, nonetheless ended up working for him in the end. And in many ways, it would seem that Donald Trump ended up on top, doesn't it? He has a beautiful wife, who he has fooled most of the public into believing was once a high fashion model herself. She has given him another child, who is good at the cyber, and stands as a living testament to the continued virility of his orange-hued father as he enters his 7th decade of life. But even better yet, Trump actually now has ownership over a stable of girls. All of a sudden, it was Trump who was surrounded by the most beautiful women in the world, while John Casablancas settled down with wife number 3 and served on Trump's board in Brazil, which begs the question, exactly what type of lifestyle was John Casablancas promoting? What type of expertise did he bring to the table? Did he have a hidden knowledge of real estate all along, or was his expertise something else entirely? We have an idea based on the people he was introduced to through Casablancas, but we will have to cover that in the next installment. Didn't we read, was it in the piece that we just read in the Daily Beast, that one of the other former partners in the predecessor firm to Trump Model Management, he left the modeling industry and went into real estate, of all things? And even when I read it, I thought, oh, real estate, how funny that he would go into Donald Trump's business. I wonder if I remember that correctly, where he went, or was it Casablancas they were talking about? I don't think so. I thought it was the other guy, Booty, right? But maybe I misremembered it, or maybe that was something higher up in this article, and so long ago I forget. But that's interesting. If there's more than one, it's particularly interesting. I mean, going into real estate, you think means like you develop real estate, you sell real estate. Well, I'm an events planner at a Trump, what is essentially like a Trump condominium sex club in Brazil, I guess, because what else does he bring to the table? All right, let's finish up with this piece. For now, I will simply note that John Casablancas died at the age of 70 of pancreatic cancer. He would go to his grave bitterly cursing the very supermodels he is credited with creating, raging about their high and mighty attitudes, inflated self-importance and sense of worth. Above all else, their lack of appreciation for everything he, John Casablancas, had done for them. He died bitching, still at the audacity of women like Linda Evangelista, expecting $10,000 a day for her presence. Never mind that his own presence went for considerably higher at the height of his career, or that it was Linda Evangelista's face and body that were being photographed, not his. That is something I will always regret, he said, of creating the supermodel. He called Naomi Campbell odious and Heidi Klum a talentless German sausage. Ever the Casablancas copycat, Donald Trump would also insult Klum, saying she was no longer a 10, and lamenting the state of her apparently less than perfect bikini body 8 weeks postpartum. In addition to his lifestyle consulting for Trump's high-class resorts, precariously located in the middle of slums, Casablancas spent his final years working on other ventures. According to a late interview by Michael Gross for his fantastic book Model, he continued to do some kind of scouting, although the clients he worked for were never disclosed. Casablancas also developed a cyber model agency, which he called Illusion 2K, which utilized the internet to facilitate global scouting. Send me your nude pictures, I guess is basically the model. The program also featured computer-animated models designed around what was considered an ideal woman at the time, named Webby 2K. Get it? 2K, Tookay. Her greatest attribute, Casablancas said, was that she would never complain. Hardy har har. But There is one final endeavor that John Casablancas took on before his death, which carries on to this day, and I think it might sound familiar to anyone familiar with Trump. John Casablancas, you see, started a modeling school. It was wildly successful, and before long, franchises started popping up all over the country like mushrooms. Women of my generation probably remember the ads in the back of YM and 17 magazine. They boasted of the training regimen that Casablancas himself used for his New Faces division. John Casablancas' School of Modeling promised to transform any young lady with potential. As screened by the admissions office during an interview and upon review of a headshot later on, I would find out that such interviews were conducted with anyone who applied, and the majority of those Polaroids ended up in the dumpster. I almost did it, but my parents balked at the cost, she writes. But my best friend in 7th grade, a former Texas beauty queen, signed on for summer classes. She would practice walking with the book balanced on her head and strut an imaginary catwalk, doing fancy pageant walking like Sarah Palin, huh? On the night before graduation, she rinsed her hair with mayonnaise at the suggestion of her Casablancas official stylist. She did this treatment at my house and was horrified when it did not wash out no matter how many rinses she tried. Her hair and our bathroom smelled like bologna sandwiches for weeks. Don't put mayonnaise on the bologna sandwiches. But anyway, don't eat bologna sandwiches. But she came back from her model school graduation with a certificate in her hand and a huge smile on her face. She was officially, at that moment, a John Casablancas girl, an actual real-life model. The thousands of dollars her family had spent were well worth it. She never got booked. Well, correction, she got booked for a singing gig at our state fair, but only after she removed any mention of the John Casablancas modeling school from her resume. It swiftly became a source of humiliation, as everyone in the industry apparently knew it was a con. Her family paid off her debt to the agency, but many other students ended up in the same kind of quagmire that she found herself in, but with no way out. They had flushed away thousands on an education they were too ashamed to list on their resumes. They had been duped by the promise of a con man who assured them his sterling reputation would guarantee success, and that the fact that they were even considered for such an honor was an honor in and of itself. Casablancas modeling schools created the blueprint that other flim-flam artists would eventually follow, using a well-known name as a lure, then providing a worthless degree or certification from a non-accredited body. Curriculum designed by various clueless charlatans, combined with high-pressure sales tactics and unapproved charges. For almost 2 decades now, John Casablancas' school has carried on his legacy, finding new victims daily, the majority of them children, and their parents who end up footing the bill. In the words of one student, here quoted from Consumer Affairs, they saw potential in anyone with a checkbook. In the words of another, the most disrespectful people I have ever been in contact with. And finally, one more, although there are a lot where these came from. My daughter went back in 1998. They told her she had to lose weight. She was 14 years old and weighed 125 pounds at the time. A famous name, the implicit promise of attaining fame and fortune, implied divulging of industry secrets and high-powered connections, high-pressure sale tactics and confusing contracts, widespread accusations of fraud and false advertising, a very rich man ripping off mostly working and middle-class families. Sound familiar? When John Casablancas died, he was eulogized in the familiar way that powerful men are eulogized no matter what their sins. Stephanie Seymour, her goblet of milk and plate of cookies were not mentioned. John Casablancas' stubborn insistence that he owned the rights and should share in the profits made off of the bodies and faces of little girls that lived on, even when those little girls were too undeveloped and disappointing compared to their mothers, not too young to write love letters to, not too young to lure back to New York, of course. I'm only a man and I have needs was, of course, never mentioned. Casablancas' legacy of fraud, the wholesale rip-off of dreams, like those of my friend, and everything that lay within the back pages of my latest issue of 17 and YM went unremarked upon. The countless number of girls who were abused and exploited within his schools and his New Faces division, his pep talks with naked adolescents trembling on scales as they straddled the fine line between model and healthy weight, were forgotten. Honestly, who knows how many were affected. Based on the conversations I've had, not a single person who worked under Casablancas' reign at Elite went unscathed. Victims of Claude Haddad, a man that Casablancas would later reconcile with and try to plot a re-entry into the industry, have formed a de facto support group because of the horrors they endured. They still cry when they talk about it. They cry when they talk about him, and they're not crying over his departure. And yet John Casablancas, the corporation, the legend, lives on. His name is still attached and promoted by his discredited chain of modeling schools, which continue to churn through small-town girls with high aspirations, low self-esteem, and gullible parents willing to accrue subprime debt to help them succeed. A tapestry woven with countless broken dreams and lost fortunes. His legacy continues to take out ads in teen magazines to lure in young girls, teach them useless skills like how to balance a book on their head while turning their hair into grease fires, and issue them diplomas printed out at Kinko's under high-volume discount. At the end, they either walk away with thousands of dollars in debt before they ever reach college, or if they're lucky, they might funnel their experience and contacts into the next level of this system. Guess where they go? Miss Teen USA. Teen modeling, hopelessly corrupt industries that will chew them up and spit them out before they reach the age of majority. In the end, despite his inadequacies, Donald Trump would end up on top. In the meantime, however, the fashion industry as a whole would go through one more unexpected and profound transformation. After the USSR collapsed, and a very small number of men profited and became untouchable, much more so than Casablancas could ever have dreamed, the cultural winds surrounding the industry changed direction yet again. It was likely inevitable, especially in such an already corrupt environment, but the results would be nothing short of devastating for many of the young lives caught in the balance. Girls from Iowa to Slovenia to Brazil. And Donald Trump was in the center of it, just as one might expect he would be, all too willing to reap the rewards. That is some damn fine foreshadowing. It's all, of course, to be continued in the next installment from Swedish Jewfish. We wait with bated breath then for the next installment. I think I got an inkling about what's coming next. How do you like that? It sounds to me like we're going to have to see if she's willing to come on the program at some point and talk all of this over. But I have enjoyed reading through this in a way. Of course, it's given me the chills and the creeps all at once. But finally, someone who thinks like me and who hasn't been involuntarily committed to a mental institution so far as I know. Damn interesting story. And I hope I can do my part in trying to pique some interest out there about this still unexplored aspect of Donald Trump's life. Well, we've done our level best to try to spark that interest. I've done a lot of work promoting this particular piece on Twitter over the last couple of days, and I'm probably still going to continue to do that. I think there's a lot of interest about this piece, about hearing it recorded for whatever reason. That seemed to interest people a great deal. I'm hopeful that the story gains some legs. I've been hinting all week that we have some additional material to add to all of this, and I do. It's all jammed in pocket, of course, and just waiting to come out. And I don't know. I think we can add a little bit to the picture. I've by no means compiled anything near as comprehensive and as coherent as what our diarist Swedish Jewfish has put together here. But I think that maybe you'll be able to draw some conclusions from the bits and pieces that I have to share with you. And we can all speculate a little bit. It'll be fun to see whether the conclusions we reach are the same as those that Swedish Jewfish reaches when part 2, and who knows whether there's even part 3 or 4. I have no idea how long this stretches out. It'll be interesting to see whether our speculation is borne out by the writing of somebody who appears to have put an awful lot of time and thought and personal experience
from Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks for sitting through it. Thanks especially to Swedish Jewfish for putting this all together. hey, perhaps I ought to contact you and we ought to sit down and see if we can't record an episode of this show once the bulk of the work is out of the way. Thanks so much for your work. I'll be back tomorrow.